Good evening, everyone. For those utilizing ASL interpretation services, our ASL interpreters today are Andrea Alefi and Craig Ridgway. In the chat, you'll find instructions on how to pin their video and a link to CART services for closed captioning for today's event.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Arva Rice. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the interim chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I would like to call the CCRB's October Public Board meeting to order. In honor of Indigenous Peoples Day, I would like to acknowledge that our offices are located in ancestral Lenape homelands. Let's all honor Lenape, thank you. Let's all honor the significance this land has to the Lenape Nation who lived on this land for thousands of years. Would the rest of the board members please introduce themselves?
Esmeralda Simmons. I'm an appointee from the Public Advocate's Office. I live in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Puma, Manhattan City Council representative on the board, and I hail from the Lower East Side.
Harmon Merritt, City Council representative from Brooklyn, and I live in Brooklyn.
Jonathan Darsh, he, him, and I, the executive director of the agency.
Corrine Irish. I live in Harlem, mayoral appointee.
A.U. Hogan, appointee Queens. I also reside in Queens.
Frank Dwyer, representative of the police department.
Demetrius Carolina, mayoral appointee, Staten Island.
Good evening, Sal Carcaterra, and I'm a police commissioner designee to the board.
Thank you. And if we can have John introduce himself, who's joining us online.
Good evening, John Siegel. I'm a mayoral appointee.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes? Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes first?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Hearing no corrections or changes, and having a motion and it being moved, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The minutes are approved. Last month, this board voted to approve the proposed rule changes granting the agency new powers. The new powers will go into effect on October 22nd, and today the Racial Profiling Bias-Based Policing Unit will present on how they will begin their investigations. I am also excited to announce that the CCRB is hosting a virtual event on November 15th to discuss the state of police reform in New York. We will have a variety of panelists to discuss the progress New York has made and what still needs to be done. Our Youth Advisory Council have been key partners in helping put this event together, and they will share the youth perspective during the event. I would like to thank the Youth Advisory Council, YAC, for all their work this year and let everyone know that applications for the 2023 YAC class will open on November 1st. The YAC was started in 2018 as the first Youth Advisory Council to a police oversight agency in the country. We welcome all New Yorkers between the ages of 10 to 18 to join us. If you know a young New Yorker who is interested in serving their community, encourage them apply to the CCRB YAC. We will now hear from our Executive Director, John Darsh, on other agency updates. John?
Thank you, Chair Rice. I wanted to take a moment to remember the life and service of the Honorable Judge Sterling Johnson, Jr. Judge Johnson was a former executive director of this agency from 1970 to 1974 when we were still a part of the NYPD. Judge Johnson served both this city and this nation, and we thank him for his decades of service to New York. Last month, a representative for Councilmember Farrah Lewis came to this meeting and asked us about our intake form and said some people have found it confusing. The confusion centers around the fact that people are allowed to file complaints anonymously, but the online complaint form requires a person to enter a name. The agency has been working on an overhaul of the intake form for a few months. but has intensified our work on revising the form, which will be live soon, and has made revisions to our revision based on the feedback we got from the representative from Councilmember Farah Lewis's office. In addition to our own IT staff, I'd like to thank the New York City Office of Technology and Innovation for their help with this important project. The agency is still recruiting to fill openings for several positions in one of the CCRB's core teams, the Administrative Prosecution Unit. The APU handles the most serious cases of misconduct and takes them to trial before an administrative law judge that works for the police department. We are also continuing to recruit additional investigators for the agency. We're going to be holding a virtual information session on CCRB careers October 19th at 5 p.m. You can register for this event by clicking the link in the chat that Jahia is going to post. One of the things the agency is looking into is relaunching our Community Partners Initiative. That was a project in which we worked with a council member from each borough so that we could have office hours at least once a month in each borough. We think it's an important way to engage local communities and meet the people of the city where they are, and we are in the process of rebooting that program. Before we get started with the meat of the meeting today, a couple of updates on agency operations. The CCRB expects to have its protest report out in coming months. Our office is open for walk-in complaints, but it is also possible to file complaints online at nyc.gov/CCRB complaint. That's nyc.gov/CCRB COMPLAINT. You can file a complaint by telephone at 1-800-341-2272 or by calling 311. And if anyone wishes to file a complaint right now who's here with us today, we have 2 investigators on hand ready to take any new complaints, Emma Stidehar and Key Busk. Do you guys want to raise your hands? Thanks, Emma and Key. Some ground rules for this afternoon. In the public session, please limit your comments to 4 minutes, whether you're online or here in person. And if you're online and wish to make a comment, if you could use the raise your hand feature, we will make sure to include you in the conversation. I want to thank the staff for all their hard work and thank the members of the public for joining us again today.
John, I have a question for you, but I'll hold it until, do any board members have any questions for the executive director? Do board members have any questions? No? Okay. John, I wanted to ask, you didn't mention the PEG that was mentioned in the last board meeting, the plan to eliminate some of the gaps. And so I just wanted to know if you could give us just a quick update.
Thank you for that opportunity, Madam Chair. So the agency's current budget is approximately $23,550,000. Of that amount, roughly $18,950,000 is salary and benefits for employees, which we also know as PS or personnel services. The remaining amount, approximately $4.6 million, is everything else we spend money on, including rent, paper, water, computers, stuff like that. We call that OTPS, or other than personnel services. The agency was given instructions by the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, to cut $706,000 from this fiscal year's budget and $1.1 million from next fiscal year's budget. The plan we submitted, known as a Program to Eliminate the Gap, or PEG, has not yet been approved. This is impacting current agency operations because OMB isn't allowing the agency to hire new personnel until the PEG is approved. The unit most impacted by this delay is the APU. We identified 4 high-quality candidates to join the APU as prosecutors. We made offers to these folks back in August conditional on OMB approval. We have not been able to move forward because OMB needs to complete its analysis of our PEG before it can authorize these new hires. 1 year ago, there were 191 open cases in the APU. Today, there are 630 open cases in the APU. This increase is caused by a variety of factors, but mostly the implementation of the NYPD's discipline matrix. We need these additional prosecutors to move cases forward in the discipline process. Both the people who were victims of police misconduct and subject officers deserve to have these cases heard in a timely manner. The agency needs these 4 prosecutors in order to do so. My fear, Madam Chair, is that we're going to lose these candidates if the delay extends further. To that end, our Deputy Executive Director for Administration, Janine Marie, and our Budget Director, David Dewick, have been working closely with their opposite numbers at the Office of Management and Budget. I'm confident that our teams will resolve this issue in a constructive manner and we'll be able to bring those people on board soon.
All right. Any other questions? All right. We have been joined by another member of our board. If you can introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. Apologies for the delay. My name is Erica Bond. I am a mayoral appointee.
All right. We're going to proceed with the meeting with the presentation from our Racial Profiling and Bias-Based Policing Unit. Darius Charney and Bianca Scott, respectively, will make the presentation for us today.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Bianca Victoria Scott. I am Deputy Director of the Racial Profiling and Bias-Based Policing Unit. It's a pleasure to finally meet all of you face to face. So today we're going to go over, again, what our unit is about, how we're going to prepare in investigating these cases. We're 10 days away from being live, and also go over again the composition of our team. So I'm going to speak for a second, then I'll be Darius, and then I'll be back. So let's see here. Perfect. So again, the city charter amendments from April 2021, it did 2 different things. First, it clarified that CCRB has the power through its abuse of authority jurisdiction to investigate claims of racial profiling and bias-based policing. And secondly, it now has jurisdiction to investigate past professional conduct of current and former NYPD members who have previously been found by the CCRB or certain other covered entities to have committed an act of bias or severe act of bias within the past 5 years to determine if that act was part of a larger pattern of bias conduct. Thanks.
Thanks. So just real briefly, I want to kind of lay out the differences between these 2 areas of jurisdiction. So the first is, with respect to complaints of racial profiling and bias-based policing, which fall under Charter Section 440C1, which is the same charter section that covers the other categories of misconduct, FADO. CCRB's power under this section will, just as is true with the other FADO allegations, we have the power to investigate the complaint, to make findings, to recommend discipline, and when appropriate, to prosecute those cases, just as we do with other FADO allegations. The same 18th month statute of limitations will apply, and just like with our FADO cases, we don't pursue investigations against retired members of service. Now, the past professional conduct investigations, which fall under a separate section of the charter, the new section 441, these cases are not going to be they're not triggered by complaints from the public. In other words, a member of the public cannot contact the CCRB and say, I want to make a past professional conduct complaint against an officer. The only way that these investigations are going to happen is if and when the CCRB or another covered entity, and I'll talk about what those other covered entities are, have already made a final determination after a full investigation that a current or retired member of service committed an act of bias within the past 5 years. So only if there has already been an investigation that has been completed and a final determination has already been made either by us or by another agency that an officer has committed an act of bias, that would be only if that happens will we then have jurisdiction to commence a past professional conduct investigation. And the focus of these past professional conduct investigations is not that prior act of bias, because remember, that prior act of bias has already been investigated and a final determination has already been made. The focus of the past professional conduct investigations will be to look into whether this prior act of bias is actually part of a broader pattern of biased conduct. And in terms of the outcomes of these past professional conduct investigations, discipline is one possible outcome, but there are other recommendations and interventions that CCRB can propose. And discipline is only, again, possible if the 18th month statute of limitations has not expired. So that's kind of the difference between the two different kinds of allegations. Investigations. And I mentioned before, the charter uses this term covered entity. Covered entities include the CCRB, the NYPD, if they investigate and make a finding that an officer has committed an act of bias, Department of Investigation, the City Department of Investigation, the City Commission of Human Rights, state and federal courts in New York State, if they were to issue a ruling that found that an officer had committed an act of bias, that could trigger a past professional conduct investigation. Other state and federal agencies that investigate, law enforcement misconduct, such as the New York State Attorney General's Office, New York State Division of Human Rights, United States Department of Justice, United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, it's important to, emphasize that each of these agencies has their own investigative process, their own way of resolving these kinds of allegations. And so it's only after those agencies have reached the end of their processes and made a final determination, as they define final determination, would that trigger our jurisdiction. Okay, so wanted to talk a little bit about how the CCRB may use data in its racial profiling and bias-based policing investigations. I think, as everyone's probably aware, direct evidence of discriminatory intent is rare. In other words, it's very rare that a police officer is going to admit that they, stopped somebody because of their race or gender, or, used language during that encounter which would directly demonstrate their bias. So what that means is that most discrimination claims that come up, in courts are proven through a combination of different kinds of circumstantial evidence. The totality of the circumstances, which I think the board is pretty familiar with that concept in a lot of our search and seizure cases. In other words, you look at all the different kinds of evidence to determine if the totality establishes by a preponderance of the evidence that the officer engaged in bias policing. And one form of circumstantial evidence, which a lot of state and federal courts have frequently relied on, is data on disparate patterns of enforcement activity. That kind of evidence, in combination with other circumstantial evidence, has been relied on by courts to sustain profiling and bias policing claims against individual police officers. So kind of following that model, we are going to try to use data as one piece of the puzzle as we investigate these cases, when we get a case of alleging bias policing. The CCRB will now have that capacity to conduct data analyses for these bias policing allegations. That's something we're very excited about. We brought on a really fantastic chief data scientist who will introduce you to later. I think she is in the room. But in order to do these kinds of analyses, the really critical piece is that we have to get access to the necessary NYPD data sets. Without that, we obviously can't do those kinds of analyses. We are currently in discussions with the NYPD about making sure we get access, and we're hopeful that we will be able to do so, but that is really, I think, the next important step for us, is to make sure that we have the access to the data sets that we would need to be able to do these kinds of analyses. So now I think Bianca is going to talk to you a little bit about the unit and how we're structured and how we're getting ready for these investigations.
Thanks, Darius. Here.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so Our unit, the Racial Profiling Bias-Based Policing Unit, was created after the passage of the new amendments. And as you know, we're housed within the Investigations Division, and we'll conduct all of the racial profiling, bias policing, and past professional conduct investigations. And we'll investigate the cases that have both racial profiling, bias policing claims and FATO allegations. So the entire case will come to us regardless of whether it has FATO. So currently, we have one director, Darius Charney, experienced civil rights police misconduct attorney, as you know, worked on Floyd, City of New York. There's me. I was previously at the New York City Commission on Human Rights for multiple years as policy counsel to the chair there. And before that, I was an investigating attorney in the Law Enforcement Bureau, investigating claims of discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations based on all various kinds of protected categories that overlap with the covered categories we have here now for claims of bias and racial profiling. We have our chief data scientist, Alex Winter, over there. I'm very happy to have her. She has over 9 years of quantitative research experience with racial and other inequalities. We've got 2 investigative managers, one whom which is here, Carl May is, oh, Tessa's here too. So they're both here. They have multiple years of CCRB experience. We're very lucky to have them as well in our leadership team. They each supervise a team of investigators and investigating attorneys. We have 3 level 3 investigators. All of them have at least 2 to 4 years experience investigating law enforcement misconduct in various capacities. Do we have anyone here? No. Okay, great. And then we've got 6 investigating attorneys who all have prior experience in criminal law, anti-discrimination law, and or policing. And we've got 3 of them here. So we've got Ken Crouch, and we've got Roberto Tavel, and Jalali Madison, who's behind this column. Can't see her. But we're really excited about our team, and we are still currently looking for 2 level 3 investigators, 1 investigating attorney, and 1 data analyst, and in the process of interviewing and reviewing applications and everything right now. We're really happy with everyone we have and excited to get started in 10 days and actually investigate our cases. Okay, so all of our unit staff have received or are currently receiving the following training. The recognized new investigator training that CCRB has, led by Jen Johnson, specialized training on the legal standards and investigative strategies for racial profiling and biased policing cases, which Darius and I lead our investigators and investigating attorneys through. And also hands-on experience with investigating active CCRB and FATO cases. Also, every closing report in an RPBP investigation will be reviewed and approved by both an investigative manager, so either Carl Mays or Tessa, and either Darius or myself before submission to the board. And that is the end of this current presentation. We are happy to receive any questions you may have, anything we can answer now, or we can also, if we don't have the answer currently, we can definitely get back to you.
One quick addition, the director of training is Jen Jarrett, not Jen Johnson.
My mistake.
She doesn't get mad at us.
Jen Jarrett, of course. Jen, if you're listening, I apologize.
Quick question.
Yes.
But just actually to the makeup of the unit as far as the numbers, how did you come about? Do you have any prediction on number of cases or amount of work? How did you come about from a director all the way down to investigative attorneys, and how did you come about this format?
In terms of the size of the unit?
Size of the unit, correct.
Well, I think first thing I would say is that we've actually downsized. Originally, we were funded for, I think it was 33 positions, and then through the PEG, we cut it to 18. We're hopeful that's going to be enough. In the last, I believe, 7 years, looking at the amount of bias policing cases that went to the NYPD was something like 3,400, which, comes out to roughly 400 or 500 a year, which is a fair amount of cases. Because these are,
Did you look at those cases as far as they went over and what the outcome was of those cases?
Went over, meaning missed.
Yeah, you said 3,400. What happened with those cases?
Well, they were fully investigated. As I understand it, the NYPD, I think, substantiated a total of 4 out of the 3,400, but they did investigate all of them.
And if you can, just very quickly, just walk me through how you envision this unit getting a case, the intake part of it. How do you get this?
Well, we actually just talked to Intake about this yesterday. I mean, obviously, if somebody comes to the CCRB and they allege that they were profiled or discriminated against, that case would be sent to us along with any other FATO allegations because, you know, as Bianca mentioned, our staff has already had a fair amount of experience investigating FATO. And obviously, we're talking about a single incident with several allegations arising out of it. So we think it makes the most sense to have one investigator investigate all the allegations. Just as happens in our, FATO investigations, the case would be reviewed by an investigative manager, just as happens in all of our FATO investigations. And then, as in our FATO investigations, there's an attorney, one of the deputy general counsel, who reviews the case and, checks to make sure everything is legally correct. Bianca and I, who are both attorneys, would be playing that same role, and we anticipate that we would also be interfacing with you all when a case is brought to the panel, just as happens now with the FATO cases. And we would be there to answer any questions that the board has.
Thank you. And just the last, you said no investigation of retired MOSs, but then you spoke about the 5-year look-back period. So can we put Soren, can we put the PowerPoint back up? Because I think it's important to understand there are 2 different kinds of cases we're talking about here. One is complaints that we investigate from the public, and the other is past professional conduct, which are not going to be generated by complaints from the public. All right, so as I said, the profiling and bias policing cases are now under abuse of authority under Section 440. So those are the cases that are going to come in through complaints from the public. The 5-year look back only applies to the past professional conduct investigations, and those are not going to be cases that the public comes in and says, I want to complain about somebody's past professional conduct. That's not how that's going to happen. The only way that we can do a past professional conduct investigation is if either the CCRB or another governmental agency has already investigated an officer for bias, done a full investigation, and made a final determination that that officer did commit that act of bias. In those cases, that would trigger our jurisdiction. So there's not going to be a past professional conduct investigation unless an officer has already been investigated and already found to have committed an act of bias. So then that's where that retired thing, then you can go back at
Then,
that point.
as the statute does say that you can look at retired officers if they were found within the past 5 years to have committed an act of bias.
And if you can, or if you want to, I'm just curious what the data scientists, give me some idea of what the data scientist in this unit is looking at. What are matrix, what are information, where are they looking?
I think it depends on the case, but if the case is about traffic stops or that the officer is accused of committing a biased traffic stop, you would want to look at that officer's recent traffic stops, maybe compare it to officers who work the same assignment to see, are there disparities here or not? That's one example, but the idea is to really look to see, does this officer have a pattern of, treating people from certain demographic groups differently? And if so, is there a way to control for all the different factors that may have influenced that pattern? So this is not simply like put up some numbers, look at it, see there's a disparity, we're going to substantiate. That's why we hire the data scientists, because a data scientist looks at a lot of different variables, runs tests, controls for a whole bunch of things, and is very careful and meticulous about drawing any conclusions unless all those kinds of factors and controls have been put into place. Because that's not something that I, as a lawyer, am qualified to do, or certainly our investigators. So that's why we felt the need to bring in someone who really understands how to analyze data and control for the relevant stuff.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
curious, once you get underway and just understanding more about the past professional conduct investigations and what they look like, and particularly interested and a little concerned about whether the data is going to be preserved in a manner that allows you to do that work. And I almost feel like it has to be preserved in advance of knowing that you're going to be looking for XYZ. And I'm just curious if that happened.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think that is one of the things we are discussing with the police department, is trying to figure out a way to your point, make sure that we're getting the data in a timely fashion, and also that we're getting it in a way that we can hold on to it and use it down the road, as opposed to like waiting until we get that case and then asking for something that no longer is being preserved. So I think we are absolutely, that's a really great point, and we are discussing that with them.
At the end of each report, investigative report, there is a question, does these allegations, I'll call it the troublesome question, represent a pattern in practice with nothing else? It's just bold out there, does the officer have a history? Is that question going to be eliminated from the reports so that we can do a better analysis of pattern in practice?
So in other words,
and not just eyeballing it?
That the thing at the end that says prior CCRB history. I mean, I think that's a larger question for the agency as a whole, because I know that is something that is part of the investigation reports. I mean, I can say for our unit, I mean, we are going to look at officers' history. Obviously, if an officer has prior biased policing complaints that have been substantiated, we think that's relevant evidence. It's again, a piece of the puzzle, as I talked about earlier, totality of the circumstances. So I think we will absolutely look at history. Whether we're going to have a separate section just on that, I don't know, but I know that is something that the agency currently does. And I don't know, John, if you want to speak to why, I think there are definitely things I can think of as to why that information is relevant, but I don't, yeah.
I think so I think the idea of why we include the section on past officer CCRB history is separate from profiling allegations, because the CCRB history is useful for one, seeing if there is a pattern in how the member of service acted, but it doesn't necessarily indicate profile. And then the other point is, if the CCRB has substantiated misconduct in the past and the officer has repeated that misconduct, it may be important to know that information for the purposes of progressive discipline. Do you want to have an increased penalty or an increased level of discipline from what the case would normally warrant? That has been a little, necessity of that information has been taken away a little bit by the discipline matrix, which has formalized the process, and it's not as amorphous as it used to be when we included that information. So I don't think it is a bad idea, Ms. Simmons, to look at it and see if we need it certainly in all of our reports.
Thank you for this presentation. I just have one question, because I noticed something in the slides about there being, at least for past professional conduct cases, the possibility, or rather that discipline is only one possible outcome. And I'm just curious about how you all are thinking about that. That's not something I think that's been within on our menu previously. And so it might be early days for this, but I think I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because this is a whole kind of new world for the CCRB. I mean, we've historically been focused on singular individual incidents of misconduct and how to address those. And now we're talking about what if that single incident is part of a bigger pattern. And so what are the right kinds of interventions? I mean, unfortunately, the charter doesn't give us much guidance, but I mean, I think as we're thinking about it, if our investigation uncovers that the pattern kind of goes beyond the one officer, and maybe it's their whole unit, or maybe it's the command, or maybe it's just even a larger problem, the intervention has to be more at like a policy or a training level. And of course, CCRB doesn't have the power to order the police department to make those kinds of changes, but I could foresee us recommending things and hopefully starting really important discussions amongst the policymakers as to what kinds of change would have to happen. But that's today, where I sit today, that's kind of what I'm thinking maybe, but we'll have to see.
So a comment and a question. One of the things I've always objected to, which has nothing to do with your unit, it's just historical, is that when I read a case at the end, it tells me how many prior complaints the officer has, and even if they're all exonerated or unsubstantiated, they create an unconscious bias in the system. And fellow board members have acknowledged that, while it's not affecting my judgment, I have read that the officer has X, Y, and Z. So as I've always said, I think that should be removed, and that information should only be provided after a decision is made on the individual case. So I raised that, Madam Chair and Executive Director, as I have many times in smaller sessions before, but I think it's particularly relevant to part of an organization that is specifically investigating bias, that the accusatory instrument, if you will, shouldn't have an inherent bias written in, since we don't tell juries what a person's bias allegations or convictions are. It shouldn't be written in. So I raised that for starters. The second thing I want to ask is, do you know how many cases you have in the pipeline that in 10 days you're going to start investigating?
Zero. And the reason is that until our jurisdiction officially goes into effect, we're not allowed to accept cases. So what has been happening over the course of time is we have been referring those to internal affairs because they're still investigating them. So we're not allowed to kind of save them up and then go live on the 22nd. So I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's what I expected, and honestly. So my question would then be to the Executive Director. If I heard correctly, we have 6 attorneys on staff plus supervision thereof. We have 631 cases sitting in the APU. Would it be appropriate for the first 3, 4, 6 months to take some of the 6 attorneys who are going to be working in this unit and assign 3 of them or 2 of them or 4 of them to help in clearing the APU backlog? That would be a service to the complainants, a service to the accused. And I would also add that it would give the attorneys a much more rounded experience of the working of this organization.
So I think in the last couple of months, the agency staff talked about the best way to use the racial profiling unit while they were still getting up to speed and hadn't yet had the cases. And we made a determination it made more sense to have them focus on investigating current FATO cases because, number one, they were going to have to do those types of investigations once they start receiving the bias-based policing cases that will include fatal allegations. And number two, unfortunately, the timeline on the APU cases is long enough that you would end up getting people up to speed on cases and then they would get yanked out and it would create more of a mess in a way than if we just get the staff on that we need to actually do the APU cases. So I'll be honest with you, my first instinct when we were trying to figure out how to get ready and what were the best way to use the racial profiling staff, my first instinct was your instinct now, is to use this resource to stop that problem. But it was not, I made a determination it wasn't the most constructive use of their time and expertise.
I just want to make sure I understood. You said if there's a racial bias allegation within a complaint and there's other FATO, it will go to you to investigate all of it.
Yes.
Okay.
As long as we've gotten somewhat in the weeds on how some of this might work, I have another such question related to past professional conduct investigations. There was a slide with all of the covered entities, or all of the agencies from which, who we may get a case. Could you talk more about how the agency would receive a case? I mean, I know it could be very differently versus whether, a matter came from a court or a matter came from CCHR. Does that boil down to sort of relationship building between CCRB and these entities? Or is there a sufficient amount of information in the public realm that would be coming from these entities?
So I think it is absolutely the former. So we have reached out to every one of those covered entities. We've had discussions, I think, with all of them now about ensuring that if and when they do make a final determination, that we're going to find out about it right away. And in the discussions, for example, with City Commission of Human Rights and Department of Investigation, they've been very agreeable to that and, said, absolutely, we will let you know as soon as, if and when we make such a determination. Similarly, I know Bianca had conversations, at least preliminary conversations with AG's office, some of the district attorney's offices also, to see if they could make sure if there's a court decision that they're telling us in a timely fashion. We also have begun discussions with the NYPD about this. So I think the answer is absolutely we have to rely on our relationships, because some of that stuff will be in the public record, obviously, if it's a very high profile case, but sometimes it may not be. And so it's really incumbent upon those agencies to notify us in a timely fashion. And also, I mean, I think what we'll probably do is every few months check in, as well, not just wait for them to tell us, but check in every few months to see if there have been any new cases that they've made final determinations in.
Will final determination include a settlement?
Well, a court settlement is usually not a finding of liability, so I don't think so. I know we talked in detail with City Commission and also Department of Investigation about how they define final determination, so we're pretty clear on that. I mean, they have an investigative process and they have the steps they have to go through to make something a final decision. I don't believe that a settlement counts as a final decision or a final determination of bias. So I think the answer is probably no on that.
Just like to ask you to please reiterate a stat that you gave us out of 3,200 cases.
3,400, yeah. I think the NYPD substantiated 4 since I believe this is since 2014.
I think that's just something I wanted to bring light on. I think it deserves another conversation. It deserves the public hearing that. It deserves some in-depth study. Again, just repeat that one more time out of
3,400, there, I think they substantiated 4. I believe if you're interested, there are a couple of, I guess I'd call them studies that have been done. One by the Inspector General of the New York Police Department, I think in 2019, they put out a report on the NYPD's bias policing investigations. And then separately, the Federal Monitor in the Floyd stop and frisk litigation, I think in 2020, put out a report on the NYPD's investigations, which for us have actually been valuable teaching tools, because it kind of points out things, kind of potential landmines and things that you really need to make sure you're doing in these investigations in terms of like following up on different evidentiary leads and, making sure you're asking the right kinds of questions. So yeah, but those 2 studies are public. I think you can find them on the internet if you're interested.
I know it's quite belated, but congratulations on Floyd. How do you think that it's so serious.
Yeah.
How do you think that this unit can go beyond the Floyd settlement, what it actually accomplished?
Well, I mean,
because I know we're still looking.
I feel like this is something that came up in my job interview. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to take this job, because I really felt like the next step is to make sure that all of the changes that the court ordered actually take hold in the real world at the street level. And so I think one of the most important ways we can ensure that is to, make sure that if in fact officers are violating the law and behaving in a discriminatory way, that we can hold them accountable, because that's kind of the last frontier. You change the policy on paper, you train people on the new policy, that's great. But then when they run afoul of it, because humans always do, are you going to hold them accountable? So I think for me, this is the next step in that process.
And you said you're interviewing people. Are you guys also on hold and hiring because of the
Yeah.
PEG?
Yeah, so that's,
We are going through our process
Yeah.
as if the hold is going to be lifted. Because there's no other way for us to function. Because if we don't bring in new people, it's going to be devastating for this agency. So we are confident that we're going to get the PEG approved by the Office of Management and Budget. We've been working closely with them, and we are proceeding with our interviewing process, not only in the APU, but also in the racial profiling unit, investigations generally, and all across the agency.
Any other thoughts or questions? One question, and forgive me if this was addressed before I got here, but what kind of communication are we doing to the public to help them understand that we're taking on these kinds of cases?
That's probably a question best answered by Jahai, who put together a really fantastic outline of all the stuff they're going to do that we got to see last week. I mean, I think it's a lot of pounding the pavement outreach, press strategies, social media strategies, partnering with a lot of community groups that CCRB has good relationships with to really get the word out, translating all those materials into hopefully 10 different languages. So yeah, that's something that I know the outreach unit is really thinking about.
Just to add on to that as well, the week of October 24th, so that Monday after we go live, is going to be all dedicated by outreach and press and everything to raising awareness for our unit and the fact that we are now taking cases and what it's about and everything like that. So yeah, we've had a couple of hour meetings with head of outreach and also Yohaida and Cleo, head of press.
Yeah, and as Monty reminded me, over the past really 12 months, we've, I think, met with like 2 or 3 dozen groups around the city and around the country to talk about this new unit and what we're going to do, and also really get feedback from them about, how we should proceed in terms of like, who we need to be doing outreach to and that kind of thing. So that's a really good, important question. So thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Darius and Bianca, for a very thorough presentation and Q&A session. As you can tell, there's a lot of interest, not only on our board, but members of the community. And so we will continue to invite you back to provide updates to the board and the general community. I wanted to also welcome Mr. Freeman. My apologies. I know you have been on the line for this presentation, but if you could formally introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening. I'm Willie Freeman, Police Commissioner Designee. I hail from Brooklyn.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay. We are now going to enter into the public comment portion of the meeting. If you are interested in making a public comment, please line up behind the podium if you are joining us in person, or use the raise your hand feature if you are joining us virtually, and we will go in order. Please keep your comments once again to 4 minutes. Yahira, would you please call on the first person?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Jahai is on.
I skipped over the presentation from Jahai Rose, so my apologies for that. We are going to have a presentation from our Director of Outreach, which was just referenced. And so Jahai, if you can proceed before we go into the public comment.
Thank you very much, Chair Rice. Bear with me for one moment while I share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
And on side, yep.
It's a little tight.
Can you repeat that?
It's good, Jack.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for attending. My name is Jahai Rose. I go by he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Outreach for the CCRB. The CCRB, Civilian Complaint Review Board, is the nation's largest oversight entity over the largest police force in the country. CCRB investigates, mediates, and prosecutes allegations of misconduct made against members of the NYPD. The agency is governed by a 15-member board. You've met many of them in this call today. 5 seats are appointed by the mayor, 5 are appointed by the New York City Council, 3 are designated by the police commissioner, 1 is appointed by the public advocate, and the chair is jointly appointed by the mayor and the city council. The CCRB investigates allegations of police misconduct. We use an acronym FATO as a helpful reminder. FATO stands for force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and offensive language. Just some details regarding the Right to Know Act. The Right to Know Act is a law which went into effect in October of 2018. This law impacts stop, frisk encounters, sobriety checkpoints, and other encounters with New York City law enforcement. The components include officers identifying themselves by providing their name and other information such as rank, command, and shield number, with some exceptions explaining the purpose of an interaction. Informing an individual of their right to say no when asking for their consent to search a person's person, property, vehicle, or home. And in certain circumstances, officers should offer business cards with their information, which explains how to file a comment or complaint about the interaction with them and that officer. Civilians can request this business card in all encounters. This is what the front of the business card looks like. And the back has helpful information as well. There are various ways to file complaints regarding police misconduct. Some of the easier ways are online at nyc.gov/CCRB complaint. Another is by calling the CCRB's hotline, which is 1-800-341-CCRB or 1-800-341-2272. Remember, if you see footage of misconduct on social media or on the news, you can file a complaint, even if you weren't there in person. Typical handle for the CCRB is CCRB_NYC. Other ways to file complaints to the CCRB include filing them at calling 311, filing them in person at 100 Church Street on the 10th floor at the CCRB headquarters. You can file a complaint by direct messaging the CCRB on social media. Our platforms are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also send a letter to the CCRB at 100 Church Street, 10th floor, New York, New York, zip code 10007. You'll also file a complaint at any local precinct. The precinct does not have to be in the area where the incident may have occurred. NYPD is required to accept CCRB complaints at any precinct, or you could request a complaint form and a postage-free envelope. The CCRB is hiring, as previously mentioned, for various positions, including investigators, outreach coordinators, APU, and for the bias-based and for racial profiling bias-based policing units. If you are interested in applying for a position with the CCRB, feel free to go to the nyc.gov jobs website and put CCRB into the search engine. If you have any questions or would like to submit a cover letter or resume, also feel free to send an email to careers@ccrb.nyc.gov. As previously mentioned, the CCRB will have its 4th annual Week of Awareness. The CCRB will partner with elected officials and community organizations to coordinate an outreach and social media campaign to educate the public about the agency's ability to investigate racial profiling and bias-based policing allegations. The Week of Awareness will take place between October 24th and October 28th. It will include mass flyer distributions at well-known hotspots such as transportation hubs and other heavily populated locations. We'll also have various info sessions with various community partners, and we'll have a social media campaign requesting elected officials, community organizations, and the general public to share information about the agency's expanded powers. If you look at the bottom, the photos are the photos of last year's outreach, which included very heavily, as previously mentioned, pounding the pavement and meeting people where they're at regarding providing information to them about the CCRB. If you'd like to request an outreach presentation, feel free to reach us at outreach@ccrb.nyc.gov. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.
Have any questions? All righty. Thank you so very much for that presentation. Appreciate it. So once again, we will now enter the public comment portion of the meeting. If you are interested in making a public comment, please line up behind the podium if you are joining us in person, or use the raise your hand feature if you are joining us virtually, and we will go in order. Please keep your comments to 4 minutes. Yahira, would you please call on the first person?
Thank you, Chair Rice. We will first be hearing from Michael Myers, joining us virtually.
Yes, I'm Michael Myers. I'm the president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. For 4 minutes, let me just say this. I found that report about 4 substantiated out of 3,400 complaints to be a very serious question. Somebody else other than me, somebody on the board should be saying, what the hell is going on here? 4 out of 3,400? There is something wrong. So my point here is that you don't just need to have a meeting with the police commissioner to ask these questions of her. You got to invite the mayor of New York to your meetings and ask him directly, what the hell is going on? I think this is a signal that somebody over there at NYPD is not taking the CCRB seriously. And it's very annoying and very upsetting to hear this kind of report. 4 out of 3,400. And nobody saying, what the hell is going on? Is anybody there over there angry, furious, upset, concerned? Has anybody sent a letter, an email to the mayor, to the police commissioner about this matter? With respect to the police commissioner, I'm sorry I missed the first minute or 2 of the meeting. I was on a call. But I have to repeat, when are we meeting? When we, meeting you, having a meeting with the police commissioner in public session of the CCRB? And I might now add, you ought to summon the mayor himself to your public meeting to ask him about your concerns, about the budget, about the 4 substantiated out of 3,400. Maybe the police commissioner and the mayor both should be there and face the public. The public has to hear from them. I don't want you to be behind the scenes and private session with the mayor and the police commissioner. They need to be up front with the public. They ought to be at a public meeting of the CCRB and hear your concerns, hear your questions, and about the budget. And about the budget. I didn't hear anybody say that they objected to the imperatives from the mayor. You're just complying. You're waiting for the approval of your complying. Didn't anybody make a case that we can't cut? That we need the staff now? Who's making that case? I don't get it. Who's making the case? Who's speaking up for the CCRB, for the people, for the public, to get an agency that is not only well personneled and efficient and capable, but is being taken seriously. And the way you find out whether the agency is being taken seriously is through its budget, through its personnel, and the responses of the police commissioner and the mayor to the complaints that are substantiated by the CCRB. My time is up, but it ain't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, for your comments. Please note that the 4 out of 3,400 was asked to be repeated a number of times by our commissioner, Reverend Carolina. We may not be able to speak in as strident a tone as you are able to, but please know that your outrage is something that is shared, I believe, by members of this board as well. In terms of the question about getting the police commissioner and the first the police commissioner to come and speak to the board. It's something that we are in conversation about and figuring out if that's the best strategy for us going forward. And you should know that the mayor has been invited to participate in the conversation that the young people themselves are having on November 15th. And so I wanted to provide that as a quick bit of feedback and see if our executive director wanted to add.
On the budget issue, I just wanted to add that the agency's proposed PEG does not cut our personnel services budget at all. It does not, our proposed PEG does not cut our PS budget. And so if it was approved, we could go about hiring the folks that the council and the executive of the city have determined that we can have. And so it is a matter of I believe if our PEG is approved, we will be able to save money as we have been requested to do, as every city agency was requested to do, but also still provide the services to the city. But while that is getting worked out, it is a potential hazard that we are trying to negotiate around, because if we lose these prosecutors, it'll be very tough to find other folks to take their place.
Right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yahira, who's next on the list?
So we'll be hearing from Francie Scanlon.
Yes, thank you. As you all may be aware, December 27th of this year will mark the 50th anniversary of the issuance of the final Knapp Commission report. I'm wondering if you have any opportunity or inclination to seize on that benchmark date, 50 years out, to reflect and consider and even engage the public in feedback about where progress has been made, where recommendations that were made have not been yet realized, and how that commission's final report still bears light on today's circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing attention to that anniversary. I was not aware that it was the 50th anniversary of the Knapp Commission. So does our executive director have any response to that?
I also had not realized it was the 50th anniversary, and I missed, I don't know if it was Francie or Ms. Francie. I was,
Ms. Gill.
thank you. I think it is something that we should keep in mind for using as a way to educate the public, using that anniversary as a way to somehow educate folks.
Okay. Yohira, who's next on the list?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Currently, there are no more folks virtually that would like to speak. I just want to thank the Office of Manhattan, the Manhattan DA's office, the Office of Congressmember Grace Ming, the Office of Speaker of the Assembly Carl Hastie, the Office of Councilmember Farrah Lewis, and the Office of Assemblymember Heidman for all attending. And I will pass it over to you, Madam Chair, for in-person comment.
We have somebody who has stepped to the mic to address us.
Hello, how are you? Excuse me. My name is Andrew. I came up here several times. Andrew, A-N-D-R-E-W. I came up here several times asking for an investigation to be open for September 4, 2018, where law enforcement had brutally assaulted me, put me in the hospital in the sidewalk against my will. So, I like Mr. Durgy, I think that's how you pronounce your last name? Dosh, sorry. Mr. Dosh answered my question. If they're planning on reopening the investigation.
Sir, you had filed several complaints?
No. September 4th, 2018. That's what I was asking about.
You asked the question, I'm going to answer.
Okay.
You had filed several complaints. we sat down with you and some investigators on the one complaint that we thought we could reopen. That case we interviewed you on, and we've reopened that case. I don't remember the date off the top of my head for the case that we reopened, but it was, of all of the complaints you made, we thought there was one that we could move forward with your cooperation. And I want to thank you for sitting down with our investigators so we were able to move forward with that case, with that investigation.
So I'm asking for September 4, 2018.
I know there were several dates that you had made allegations about, and there was one that we were able to move forward on. And so if you'll be kind enough to wait, we'll have someone go look it up, and I'll tell you which one we got reopened.
You know, every time I keep coming up here, you keep saying I need to wait. I feel that you might think that I might be embarrassed how law enforcement keep attacking people. No. Just let me ask you this question. Do you think that I'm embarrassed that I got fired from my job that I put online in 2013, that being followed around by a terrorist organization trying to get me fired, and I got fired in 2016? Do you think that I'm embarrassed that I'm homeless because I'm just homeless? Or do you think I'm embarrassed that law enforcement make people homeless and get people fired from their jobs, like Colin Kaepernick, the mayor of H.A. Brown, a captain in California, calling that law enforcement terrorism, or the councilman calling that law enforcement terrorism? Rest assured, I'm not embarrassed of what a couple of people in law enforcement are doing to me or the American public. I want everybody to know that these people are criminals. They're terrorists, and they're terrorizing the American public. President Joe Biden called the people who stormed the Capitol terrorists and thugs, which included corrupt people in law enforcement. These people are a terrorist organization, and they're a danger to the society, raping women, planting drugs on people, murdering people, and they attack me as well. So I'm not mad at corrupt people in law enforcement. All I'm saying is action needs to be taken against them for their terrorism. They attacked me September 4, 2018, and according to the CCRB website, your own website, it says that you're supposed to do a proper investigation. The CCRB did not do a proper investigation. It says on your own website that you're supposed to talk to witnesses, get camera, get video. You guys did not do that. I told you about the video. I told you about the cameras. The CCRB did not do that. So I'm asking that the investigation be reopened for September 4, 2018, because the CCRB did not talk to the witnesses. They did not go out and check out the cameras like your own website says. Your own website says that you would go and check out the cameras, check out the videos. You did not do that. I captured them on another recording device, and the CCRB did not check out my recording device. So the CCRB did not do a thorough investigation as the website says.
Thank you, Andrew, for your question. I believe you get additional information on what case you're able to go forward
Yes,
with.
so we are currently investigating the incident that occurred on March 5th, 2022. We did not reopen your case from the 2018 date.
Right, so I'm asking, since the CCRB did not go out and check out the video cameras that's on your website that you guys would do, you guys didn't do it, so I'm asking you to reopen the case because you guys did not go.
Has passed, we can't reopen.
Okay, so if the statute of limitations passed, then whose fault is that? Is that my fault, or is that the CCRB fault that they didn't do a proper job?
It may be, but we can't, we don't have jurisdiction anymore.
It may be
It may be, we don't, I don't know the case specifically, but we can't, we just can't reopen it at this point.
So I did review the cases.
Okay.
Sir.
Okay.
I reviewed the cases. I explained to you that we could not investigate the cases from before the March 2022 date. And I understand that you're upset, and I apologize that you're upset. But I will not be changing my determination that we cannot reopen your earlier complaint.
I never said that I was upset. All I said was, can the case be reopened? And you said that, she says that's the statute of limitation. And whose fault is that? That's not my fault. You guys did not do a proper investigation. And you still don't.
I'm not going to get into the details of why that case was closed from 2018. And I understand that you were saying that you were not embarrassed by them, but I'm still not prepared to discuss
No,
them. Sir,
I'm not embarrassed by terrorists.
sir,
No, go ahead.
I'm telling you, I'm not. I consider the matter closely. I looked at all the complaints that you filed, and we're moving forward on the one that we can move forward on.
What's that to do with the CCRB not checking out the cameras as your website claims? Your website claims that you check out the video cameras. You refuse to do it, which means that you refuse to do a proper investigation. So that raises this question. Are the CCRB going to, how many cases have they done that in the past, and are they going to continue to do that in the future, refuse to do a proper investigation? You see? Now, so that's on camera, and I have the video that they had a software that you refuse to check out.
Sir,
Okay?
I'm sorry if you are concerned.
It's on camera. You didn't do a proper job. And you refuse to open up
I'm
the
not
case.
conceding that the agency didn't do a proper job. I'm telling you that the case
You
was
didn't do a proper
investigated.
job.
No,
It's on your website.
Sir,
You want me to read it to you?
sir, I
right.
know what is required of our investigation.
We're going to go to the next, we're going to go to the next person. Thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. We understand, and we will be going forward with the case that we can. Okay? Thank you very much for your presentation. Can we have the next person come to the mic, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Wilkerson. I represent the Center for Court Innovation, our Staten Island Justice Center site. I wasn't expecting to come up to ask questions today, but related to the presentation from the Racial Bias Investigative Unit, I did have 3 questions, primarily directed to Mr. Charney, but also for any further insight or reflection from the board. So the first question I have related to the reference statistic of 3,400 bias-related cases since 2014. I wanted to know how many cases in total over the course of that time, as well as that statistic measured against.
So the 3,400 cases were racial profiling cases that were investigated by the NYPD.
Right.
They were not CCRB cases.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why the city council made the decision to have the CCRB begin investigating these types of cases is it did not think that that was an appropriate percentage of substantiated allegations. The council felt that based on the number of substantiated cases, they thought a different agency might be able to do differently. We did not investigate those cases. It may have been that our agency had the same results. We'll have to see. Mr. Charney and Ms. Scott laid out how we intend to proceed with our cases when we start getting them on the October 24th, and we're able to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Darsh. My second question is related to the creation of the unit and how they would then obtain cases. Would there be any defined parameters for what gets brought to their attention as a bias-related case? So does it solely need to be referenced that there might have been potential bias in within the person's complaint, or are there checkpoints similar to how FATO is constructed?
So I'm going to ask Darius to come up and answer that in more detail. But the short answer is no, it's not solely upon the point of it's not solely a burden on the complainant to bring it up. And I'm going to ask Darius or Bianca, whoever you feel is best situated to answer it.
That is a great question. And this is something we were actually talking about with our intake unit yesterday, because, obviously some people might come to the CCRB and they'll use the magic words and say like, I was profiled or I was discriminated against. And those are obviously the most straightforward. But sometimes people don't necessarily use those words. So then it really becomes about what are they saying happened to them, and really then looking at that and then maybe asking some follow-up questions, not leading follow-up questions, but questions to kind of get information about, what happened during that incident to see if, in fact, maybe they were treated worse than somebody else who was of a different race or so forth. So I think that's kind of how we're going to try to approach it, not solely to Mr. Darsh's point, not solely expect the complainant to say the magic words, but asking questions to understand what did they say happened to them and whether or not maybe bias was at play.
Can we hear your final question?
Thank you, Mr. Charney, and again, Mr. Darsh. So my final question, again, referencing the statistic of the 3,400 cases with only approximately four disciplinary actions. More so as a reflection-based question for the board or Mr. Charney, might this data serve as a catalyst for interrupting the NYPD's current bias investigative unit? I do feel it does seem intervention is necessary, and I think the public would be interested in further analysis of the implications related to that finding. I would hope that makes sense, my question.
I think that the unit is the intervention, the unit that we have is the intervention to what has been done in the past.
Stole my answer, Ms.
All righty.
Great question, by the way.
Yeah.
Great question.
Not just because she's also from Staten Island.
Do we have anyone else in the room who has a question? Anyone else who has a question in the room? No?
I think they're just.
Okay. Okay. Do we have any old business to come before the board? Any old business? Do we have any new business to come before the board? Hearing none, I'm going to move now that we break into executive session. The agenda for executive session is the board may deliberate on full board cases, receive an update on litigation from the general counsel, and the executive director will provide an update on pending personnel actions. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. This portion of the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
So moved. Thank you.